What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, just gonna jump on here, talk about the formal visits for the Steelers at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Got the chance to interview these guys yesterday. Again, appreciate Steelers now for sending me out to Indy to cover the Combine. But we got to see some guys that the Steelers are showing some interest in, and we'll talk about all those guys kind of individually, how I see them. Four of the five guys that we have confirmed formals on, I've watched a decent amount to give a pretty in-depth recap on. So we'll get to those guys. I do just want to kind of give some necessary context because I'm sharing my screen. This is the Steelers Now Combine Tracker. You guys can go find that on the website. But basically, everybody that's italicized was an informal meeting, and then everybody who is not is a formal meeting confirmed. But you'll notice over the course of the week, they just did not meet with a lot of guys that went to the Senior Bowl. So some of the guys that I think a lot of people are, sending me mock drafts on Twitter and stuff like, hey, what do you think about this mock draft? They're including guys like Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon, Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo. Both of those guys, really impressive players, but they saw them at the Senior Bowl. So there's just they've used, you only get a certain amount of formals. So you only get 45 of those. They're the 18-minute, more strict kind of structured meetings at the Combine, and they've just chosen to use those this year, it seems like, on guys that they haven't already met with. Now, again, will that matter? I don't know what that means going forward, but it's just how they seem to be doing stuff this year. So notably absent on this list are guys that have been or were at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, excuse me. Jackson Powers Johnson, Zach Frazier. I wasn't actually at his podium, so I'm not really sure 100% what that interview was like. He was really late coming out. Fuaga from Oregon State, another guy that they had interest in. So a lot of these guys, if they've already talked to him, that's why they may not be meeting with them at the Combine. But I do have, some thoughts on a lot of these guys. A couple of these players I really like a ton, and I've talked about at length on Twitter. But just before we get started, y'all know the deal. Just like, subscribe, turn on notifications, drop me a comment. All that stuff is greatly appreciated. We also went over 5,000 subscribers this week. So I just really want to thank you guys so much for that. The support has been overwhelming. We are coming up on the 1-year anniversary of me creating this channel, and to already be at 5,000 subscribers, it's probably not a lot for a lot of people, that do this, full time or whatever. But I just really appreciate the support, and thank you guys so much for trusting me to bring you guys unbiased, genuine content, and I'm really proud of just the way that we've built stuff. So let's get into it, man. So the first player I actually want to talk about, Amarius Mims from Georgia. If you remember, a couple weeks ago, I dropped a mock draft on SteelersNow.com, and Amarius Mims was my pick at pick 20. Right tackle for Georgia, but he came into school as a left tackle. First off, this is a get off the bus type player. When you see this dude in person, and I was standing about 5 feet away from him yesterday, he looks the part of what an elite NFL tackle looks like. Just a physical specimen. Again, 6'7", 340 is what they have him listed at. And man, he is well built for 340. This dude looks like he has zero fat on his body. He's going to be a 21-year-old rookie, underclassman, declare. Honestly, I think the big conversation about Mims has been just the lack of overall experience. This is a guy who only played about 800 snaps at Georgia due to various things that we can talk about it here in a little bit. But extremely polished pass protector. I was actually giving this take to somebody at the Combine, that another guy who does like draft content like I do. And I was actually telling him that I feel like I'm a little bit higher on Mims at this point in the process than I was even on Broderick last year, just because I think that Mims is just a more polished pass protector. Like, he's much better with his hands. He has really quick feet, can mirror, can redirect. I think that he has good eye discipline for how little experience he has. He does a really good job passing off stunts, just working with his other offensive linemen. He can redirect really well, like I said, off, double moves, counters, things like that. There's just not a lot to his game already that gives me red flags. And I just think when you look at a player like this that is so incredibly young, and I think the sky is the limit for this kid. There are some things that do kind of concern me a little bit. He can play a little bit tall, let guys in, let guys, get off blocks from him. He doesn't impact the run game the same way that Broderick did at Georgia, in my opinion. I don't see the same type of player there. Broderick was just unbelievable power, and the way that he could just dominate in space and stuff. And Mims has the athletic ability to do that. It's just when he gets there, he falls off blocks. I think it's because he plays a little bit tall and doesn't have as good of balance at this point. But the main concern with him is just we just don't have a very big sample size. I actually want to go back and watch. Now that we have confirmed interest, I'm going to go back and watch some more 2023 tape. But when you look at that college football playoff game against Ohio State, Ohio State had multiple guys that, Zach Harrison that was in last year's draft. They have 2 edge rushers this year, Sawyer and JT. I can't say his name. I don't want to butcher it. But those guys really good players. And, I thought that especially over the course of the game, he just started dominating, man. And I got to talk to him about that a little bit, got some really good answers. He's a really good interview as well. There are things that he's going to have to answer in terms of, durability. I think that's the big thing. He exited quite a few games this year, in and out of the lineup. Again, we just didn't see as much snaps as we wanted to. From a player that's clearly extremely talented. So there's going to be, like, in my opinion, he could go top 10 and it wouldn't surprise me. He could go 32nd and it wouldn't surprise me. And he could be the best offensive tackle in this entire class, and it wouldn't surprise me. I really think that he has that many different outcomes available to him just because based on what we've seen, the film is really good. But I just want to make sure I hit that home. Like, this is a guy who is inexperienced, but I don't think he's raw. And I know that there are some, I think a lot of people are really invested in the offensive line group, and it is a pretty good class. But I have some concerns about, can the Steelers or Pat Mayer develop 2 young offensive tackles at the same time? Those concerns aren't nearly as high on my radar with a guy like Mims, just because I think he's a little bit further along than a lot of people have been willing to admit, just because they lack of experience. So, but a really good player. Definitely an option there at 20. I fully expect them to put the full court press on at the Georgia Pro Day. This is a player that, he's going to be a good one. I really do believe that. I'm pretty high on him, and I think you guys will see that when I start releasing some rankings later in the cycle. Next player we'll talk about, J.C. Latham. I'm trying to get better about making sure that I'm telling you guys measurements and where they're going to school, because I got a comment on that last video about this. So try to do a good job. I forget that not everybody's watching these guys like year round like I am and doing summer scouting, and I'm just so programmed to just not acknowledge that. So I'll get better, I promise. J.C. Latham, 6'6", 360, thick boy from Alabama, right tackle. This is a guy who will be a 21-year-old rookie as well. Like I said, thick, sturdy. Thing about Latham, man, vice grips for hands. Very good hand strength. This dude gets his hands on you. The play's over at that point. He basically has clamps for hands. Really good play strength. I feel like he is a tone setter in the run game. This is a guy who, when you let him play downhill, base blocks, double teams, he gets up to the second level. There are some outstanding, plays when he gets to the second level. He is a finisher and plays like that every single snap. I think that he does move well for his size. When Alabama asked him to get out in space, whether pulling or, just getting to the second level and stuff, I do think that he has good movement skills for his size. I worry a little bit about the redirection skills. I think his range as a pass protector is kind of average-ish. I think he can get to his spots, but I think the big thing that was concerning me was just the redirection skills. Like, if he does get beat early on the rep, I don't see that ability to consistently get himself out of those compromising positions. And he just got beat inside a couple times when I was watching him on tape. I do also think that he's more of a gap scheme player than a zone player. I think that you want to get this dude's downhill, inside zone, run concepts like that. I think if you're projecting him into an outside zone heavy system, like I'm pretty positive that the Steelers are going to be with Arthur Smith, at offensive coordinator, I don't know that that's the best way to get the most out of him. I do think that Latham is going to be a tackle at the next level. I think that a lot of people or some people may have questions about, with him being so heavy, is he going to be able to stand out there on an island in pass protection? I actually don't really have as many concerns on that regard. I do think he's a tackle. I just, if I was drafting him, I would want to make sure that I'm in a gap or a man scheme. That's just my opinion for it. But again, play strength, awesome. Anchor, awesome. Hands, very, very strong. He's got a lot of plus traits to him. I'm just not really sure I see the fit. And that's really the case with a couple of these guys that we'll talk about. But I still think, you want to do your homework on a lot of these tackles, because maybe there's stuff that you're trying to get to know in interviews. maybe, just because you play in a zone heavy scheme in college doesn't mean you can't do it at the next level. It's just really, I'm looking for like movement skills and, just traits that are going to translate more than anything else. But next player we'll talk about, really interesting player here, Duke offensive lineman, Graham Barton, 6'5", 315. Barton started his career in college at Duke. He played his freshman year at center, I think like 400 snaps, then transitioned to left tackle. So a very unique thing in college to see that. But some of the things I like about Barton's game, I want to go back and watch more tape of these last three guys because I feel like I saw a lot of Latham and a lot of Mims. But, with Barton, most of my exposure to him has been watching them live. For obvious reasons, I am a Duke basketball fan, so I do tune into Duke football when I can. But I think he plays a really good balance. I think he's got a stout anchor. The anchor really showed up for me when he was going up against Jared Verse. So Jared Verse, Florida State, you guys saw him test a couple days ago. Really, really strong, really, really good athlete, and one of the most, polished, or I would say just translatable pass rushers in this draft class. He's going to be a top 15 pick. And I thought he, held his own out there at left tackle. So a really high effort player who sustains blocks really well. I really like the finishing ability that he had. I always remember, I want to say it was Pro Football Focus. There's a guy that I follow, Maxwell. He was talking about, I guess PFF has a stat called like highlight worthy blocks or big time blocks or something like that. Basically, it's just like pancakes. And I think Graham Barton like led the league or something like that 2 years ago. And I went back and like this was really before I had watched Barton over the summer. And I just remember like he was constantly just getting guys to the ground. Love the mentality that he plays with. Also, a really good interview. He talked a lot about the podium. A lot of questions were asking, are you going to move to center? Are you going to move to guard? Are you going to play left tackle? He was like, look, I feel comfortable. I can play all five positions. Wherever you want to put me, I can play there. I don't have a preference. He actually gave me a couple really good answers about some of the difficulties transitioning inside, but also, some of the advantages to being out there, like in more space, things that he can carry over to the new position. I think the big thing with him, making the transition to center is it's a totally different ball game. And I think a lot of the guys that are being asked to do that in this class or in previous classes, they talk about, it's not something that is as easy as other people make it seem. I think his hands can be a little bit inconsistent and, lead to penalties. He's not the longest player, so I feel like that's really the number one thing because he has a movement ability, I feel like, outside to kind of get by, but he just lacks length. And a lot of times, if you don't hit those thresholds, teams are just automatically, they're not even going to give you a chance at the next level to play tackle. They'll immediately transition you inside. Some of the success stories that we've seen with like shorter arm tackles, Rashawn Slater comes to mind. It's not impossible to do it. It's very, very rare if you have, lack of length at the next level because of how talented the edge rushers are. So, I know Steelers fans probably have PTSD about moving guys that haven't played center a lot into playing center at the next level. I think of Kendrick Green, some of the experiments that they've had moving guys around, particularly on the offensive line that, just haven't really developed into the players that we were hoping they would. But, Graham Barton, really impressive player, has good tape. Like I said, he's had some really good, matchups. Like I mentioned, the one against Verse stands out. The Clemson game stands out to me as well. A couple really nice pass rushers over there. Obviously, Clemson always churning guys out on the line, but he's a nice player. I'm very interested to see. I really wish he was dealing, I think, with an injury. He had to drop out of the Senior Bowl, and we didn't get to see him. He was actually going to work at center for teams that week, so it's kind of unfortunate that we didn't see that. Again, freshman, he did it. Freshman year, he did it. It was a long time ago. He's a different player than he was then. So we'll see. I think he's going to test fairly well, and somebody that I want to dig into a little bit more. I'm going to try to find some of that freshman tape here in the next couple of days. Next player we're going to talk about, a really highly discussed player. I feel like even dating back to the summer, Cedric Van Pran, Georgia. The Steelers had a formal meeting with him, 6'4", 310. Van Pran was a guy that was actually on the Senior Bowl roster originally and then dropped out. I don't know that we got an answer on why he dropped out. I'm sure that was maybe it was an agent thing. Maybe that was, he was dealing with a minor injury, or maybe he was just training to get ready for the combine. But one of the things that really stood out to me when I was watching Van Pran, who I've mostly seen out in the summers, a lot of his 2022 tape, excellent puller, pin and pull concepts. This dude, money on pin and pull. I really like the way he targets in space too. Some of these poor linebackers, poor defensive backs that get caught one-on-one with him just end up on the wrong side of a highlight. And that's really it's really cool to see him watch or to see him work in that space. But I do think he has a good first step, and I also think his offhand quickness after the snap is fairly good. He will use independent hands in pass pro. That's something I like as well. And I also think he's got a pretty sturdy anchor. Even though he does sometimes let guys get into his chest, he does hold up fairly well with a good base. So obviously the pedigree is going to be there. Two-time national champion, and he's considered a leader on the offensive line. I know he was a captain for a couple games. I'm not really sure how Georgia does captains, but I remember that being a big piece in somebody's video. But big concerns for me with Van Pran. I think that he is, like I said, he has good first step quickness. I think you saw that when he's asked to pull or like run an inside zone, stuff like that. But I don't see a extremely rangy athlete. I don't see a plus athlete at the center position. And really that shows up, stunts were a particular problem for me when I was watching him in 2022. I remember that was something that I tweeted about that was kind of worrisome because when loopers would come across, he doesn't have like the change of direction skills that you kind of want at the pivot. And I also just think about the way that the NFL is trending with some of these defensive coordinators putting their best pass rusher right across at that zero tech position, right across in the center. Some of these really twitchy guys that can give you those jab steps and crossovers. I think that that's going to be pretty problematic with Van Pran. So I just think he's a little more scheme dependent. I would personally want him more in like a gap scheme where I could like pull him, where I could get him moving downhill, double team, stuff like that. But in terms of outside zone, again, which is what I think the Steelers are going to run, I'm not really a huge fan of that fit. I think that he has starter level capabilities, but I'm just not sure that, the fit is necessarily there. But decent player. I'm going to go back and watch. I feel like I was a little bit lower on him in the summer, and now I feel like the hype on him has cooled a bit just because, Jackson Powers Johnson had the season that he did, and then Zach Frazier, I feel like helped his stock too. So we'll go back and look at that. Graham Barton, like I said, making that transition probably to center, but interesting player. The last guy I want to talk about, Blake Fisher, Notre Dame, right tackle, Joe Alt's running mate, 6'6", 312, 21-year-old rookie from Notre Dame. This is the player that I definitely have the least bit of exposure to. I've seen a lot of clips on Twitter, and I've seen a couple of games, one or two games from the summer, and really just like live viewings this year. But one of the things that kind of sticks out for me, very, very heavy-handed in pass pro. I was just kind of like searching some stuff that I had saved on my computer. Heavy-handed in pass pro. I think he has solid length. He plays a good bend. So this is a guy who has some traits to necessarily work with. And I also think as a run blocker, there are some really impressive displays of just like raw power in the run game. So there are some flashes. I do not care for a lot of the technical aspects of his game. One thing that I really noticed was letting guys into his chest, and he can anchor, but he doesn't have like a top notch or elite anchor to get by with it. Like how Broderick was getting by with it at Georgia with letting guys into his chest. Fisher's not that same type of player. He's not that same type of athlete. Doesn't have the same type of tools. And I just feel like as a technician, he's a little bit of a mess right now. I actually saw another really good draft podcast that I try to tune into when I can is, The Athletic, Dane Brugler. I'm pretty sure Dane compared Fisher to Chuks Okorafor, and I know that's probably everybody's gonna roll their eyes, whatever. But there are some similarities I feel like between Fisher and Okorafor. Probably, he's a decent athlete, but probably not somebody that you would say like, oh, that's a great outside zone or wide zone fit. But I do think that Okorafor is a little bit different for me, but he was also in that same category where he was just really raw and had some tools, but really raw coming out, and eventually developed into like a baseline or solid starter. But where Fisher is currently projected to go, it's like late day 2. I think the consensus board has him around 90 or 100. Sometimes tackles get that kind of premier position bump. But I think if you're looking for a tackle, like say if the Steelers were to draft a center early, corner early, or maybe they take a receiver early. They showed a lot of receiver interest down in Indy. And then they waited or were forced to wait to take a tackle, or maybe they got a veteran tackle in free agency. Fisher is a guy that I think will be on their radar. It has, quality swing tackle, versatility probably there. I would be interested to see him work at left tackle. I know, Alt being on the left side has kind of prevented that from happening, but not much positional versatility with him thus far, but that doesn't mean necessarily he can't do it. But yeah, interesting group of offensive linemen. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I have plenty of draft content on SteelersNow.com. I got draft profiles going up. Talked about A.D. Mitchell, Terrion Arnold, some other guys. I'm going to write up Amarius Mims again later today. So just make sure y'all follow everything on SteelersNow.com. As far as some housekeeping stuff for how things are going to go on the channel this week, I do think I'm going to try to put maybe a receiver film room together. So maybe I'll look at one of these receivers that they had a formal interview with, get you guys some exposure to some of these. This is a really talented group and a lot of guys that I really am big fans of, and a lot of guys that I liked that looked really good in Indy. So I was really happy with that. So, just as always, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff. And I will holler at y'all next time. Peace and love.